mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have 2 academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst, and today's guest is Max Manthou, also known as Purple Jesus or Purple. Max, thanks so much for joining us. Just give us a little bit of background about your experiences in athletics that have taken you into pro pickleball.
All right. Well, happy to be here. Hello, everyone. So I started as a tennis player. I played 2 sports, and I felt like that was really, really important for me to not burn out. That's pretty popular in tennis, especially. So I played basketball and tennis. Basketball was my one true love. I'm only 5'8", and my dad made that very clear when I was young. Like he said, "Look at me." He's about 5'7", and was like, "Okay, so you're not going to get much taller than this. You should pick something else." So I went with tennis mostly. I was like 4 months on as far as like the season, the year went. Played through my high school in basketball, but then I had to leave it behind. Went to college at University of Washington on scholarship to play there in tennis. I graduated. I eventually went to the Peace Corps in Indonesia, so it changed my life pretty drastically. And when I came back, pickleball had really started booming. And, with my tennis skills, it was a pretty easy transition. I think a lot of high-level tennis players start, with a head start. They are somewhat like a 4.0 if the listeners are familiar with the rating system, kind of right away. And it was easy to improve. So I also played badminton and table tennis at different parts of my life. So as far as racket sports go, I think I've kind of touched almost all of them. I never really played squash, but a lot of different skills I developed in each of one of those. And now, it's kind of coalescing into my pickleball being now. Jumped right into it and I haven't stopped. It's so much fun.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about your book here in a minute, but one of the things in your book you talk about is Agassi's biography, which I've also read. And I heard the corollaries between basketball was my first love and Agassi loved soccer. Okay. So how is that transition going from, I love basketball, but I realize I'm not going to maybe be as good as perhaps I want to be in this sport, so I have to transition to something else. What was that like?
It was only really hard at about 8 when my dad made sure I knew the situation. I still, tried to get as good as I could in basketball, and we had a lot of success. But realized that there's like a natural limit. Just from my size and even in tennis, actually, it was a little bit harder to come to a realization about that in tennis, because it wasn't until like late college where I was like, man, everyone I'm playing at this level, where I was basically semi-pro or pushing into the pro ranks, is really big, has a huge serve and length advantage on me. And the way that tennis is going, you see the top players, it's getting taller and taller. I mean, when I was really young, I'd say 6'2" is sort of ideal, but then nowadays it seems more like 6'4", 6'5". And so that hit pretty hard as if, there's only maybe one of my type of player in the top 100 at all times in tennis. Most recently, like a guy like Diego Schwartzman. There's always usually one freak, and I wasn't that guy. I wasn't. I was good, but not to that level that you need to be. Not to like to the Nate Robinson level, my idol in basketball when I was growing up. Us little guys. So yeah, no, that was pretty tough. Not so much the basketball part. I kind of came to terms with that quick, but the tennis part too. Yeah, realizing I'm a bit too small, and I'm happy now to have found pickle where those limitations are not quite as stark.
How did you go from playing pickleball as kind of a recreational, this is fun, I'm good at this, I'll do some tournaments here and there, into that transition into, wow, I can earn money in this, I can be successful in this, I can travel maybe even the world doing this? What happened that allowed you to make that step? Because you and I are both involved in pickleball, and there's so many young college players out there, even juniors, my own son being one of them, who look at this as an opportunity maybe, but making that step to professional is a big jump.
Yeah. The answer for me is my favorite word in English, serendipity. I started first just as I come back to the country from living abroad, and I was just playing with all types of people in the community because I kind of needed to reconnect with people in my community. I lived away for so long, and I was playing with, I made friends with groups, in their 60s, women, like at that age, which was awesome to be able to play with them at a decently high level. And then I ended up going to my master's program. I used pickleball as like a research topic. So I got back into it there. As recently as last year, I was still just playing with my friends. So I now played very competitively, but still basically with friends only, the ones that were able to compete at that high level. So it wasn't until this year and around March, I was very much planning to go to PhD program. I want to be an anthropologist, sort of my end goal, at least academically. So I was on that track, but then out of nowhere, a very good player from Oregon asked Eric Lang, who's now my current partner on the SoCal Hard Eights and in most all tournaments. He asked me to play with him. I had never really met him before, so we had a meeting. He asked me to play in an event down in Miami, APP Miami. That was the first time someone of my level really, asked me to be a part of their team. So I went out there, and then right away we got paired with, at the time, which would have been a top 3 team in the game. We were matched up against Gabe Tardio and Andre Deescu, both of which are in the Premier League and MLP, and always doing damage in the PPA draws. They had just won, I believe, or gotten to the finals of the PPA event the week before, and but I kind of, as a new person to the professional scene, I didn't know, I guess, what I was getting myself into. So I came with a completely fresh mind. They didn't know my game, and I played really well, and we won pretty easily. We ended up getting bronze in that event, and that sort of catapulted me out of nowhere onto the pickleball scene. And the few days later, the MLP draft occurred, and there are 88 or 44 men picked, and I was 41st. And that alone was a huge surprise. And without this result in Miami that I wasn't even planning on playing, I would not have been considered. So I suddenly had to make a choice. Do I go to grad school, or do I kind of give this pickleball thing a go for real? I ended up declining my grad offer. I jumped in to pickle, and it all happened very fast. And then I got a coach, and so this whole year has been a whirlwind, and nothing I could have predicted. And it wasn't something that I had my goals on. I didn't set my sights on it. But since it's an opportunity, and I'm a lot better, I think, than I thought I was going to be. I think maybe I kept my expectations low from dabbling in so many other sports and knowing that there's a natural ceiling. But doesn't seem like I've hit it now yet in pickle.
This show obviously really is around coaching, and you said I went and got a coach, and I'm curious what that entails in pickleball, because I've seen some quote unquote coaching in pickleball, and it's all over the place.
Yeah. So I feel blessed in so many ways in my life. At different times in life, I've met the right person, it seems. And it's happened again this year in pickle, not just with Eric, but there's a great community. So I live in Tacoma, Washington, suburb of Seattle. And there's a great community for pickleball in Portland, which is not a short drive. It's about 2 hours, 20 minutes from me. But I make it often because there's a coach that we have in the area that has 3 courts at his house that we all congregate at and have like team practices basically. His name's Travis Rude, and I hear what you're saying. I think coaches in pickle, because the sport is so new, can come in, a lot of shapes and sizes, a huge range of quality, really. But I'm blessed to have Travis because he played a little bit on the senior pro tour, and he's really transitioned now fully into coaching. And the dude is built different. He sees the game differently than anyone I know. He sees the game, I think, in the future. Like he's always talking about, in a year or so, this thing we're doing will be normal. Or always talks about the future best us, like always projecting forward. So he's ahead of the game. He sees the game differently. He's recently started traveling with us to events and trying to expand his network with other players. So not a lot of other players have this. I think coaches are sprouting up, quite quickly around the country, but to have someone like that close enough has really kept me in the game too. I mean, without him and Eric, I think this would be a shorter stay for me, but yeah, it's a blessing.
You play both singles and doubles, and in pickleball, if most people ask what singles like, I would say it's in many ways mini tennis, whereas pickleball doubles is completely different. How do you train for both, or do you train for both? How do you prepare to do something that is very physically demanding in singles versus maybe a lot more technical in doubles?
Yeah, so the singles training as of now, I mean, I wish it was more complete, but for now, I basically just do body training. I mean, I do a ton of running, smaller weights to get myself in the best possible fitness, and then I rely really on my training from tennis, throughout my life. Mm-hmm. The reason for that is singles pickleball is so different than doubles pickleball that you really need a different type of practice partner. And in the group that I'm with, I don't quite have an equal. The Northwest, even though pickleball was birthed here in Seattle area, there aren't because of the weather. I think, people have moved away. Got players like Riley Newman, Vivian Glosman, Tyson McGuffin. So we've had players, but in general, the stock of elite level players is very low. So I don't quite have too many singles options as far as, opponents to prepare with. And if we talk about my book, that is a huge thing for me. Co-opetition, having someone else there to cooperate and compete with you. So for singles, I get it where I can, but it isn't consistent. And that's also why when I go into events, I don't have really any expectations for myself, because I don't feel like I could expect myself to compete with the best in the world. I can expect myself to compete, but not to like truly do well without, proper training. Doubles, I practice almost exclusively. It's really, it's a constant. Every time I go anywhere, I'm thinking about doubles. There is a bit of an issue with mixed also because of the area I'm in. When I say that we have a great group in Portland, it's mostly male. In fact, almost exclusively male. There's still some decent females, but they don't come to our group. And there isn't a female in the Northwest at the moment that would be like a consistent presence in an APP draw. Mm-hmm. So it is actually pretty difficult to get mixed practice as well. And I would say going forward, I really want to try to correct this imbalance in my training where, it's mostly just men's doubles and then just scrambling, I guess, for mixed and singles practice. But I definitely if the opportunity was there. And, I'm hoping that more players will sprout up and offer some friendly competition with me.
Last question before we move on to your book. Your doubles partner in men's lives in the Northwest or no?
Yeah, so he lives in a Portland suburb.
So Oregon. You are able to train together.
Yeah, I drive down twice a week when I'm here. It feels like we're traveling so much. I'm not really home a lot, but twice a week to to Portland, so it takes 4.5 hours round trip. But in this stage of my life where pickleball is what I'm doing, it's worth it. And the drive actually isn't so bad. It's just a straight shot down the interstate. So yeah, twice a week.
Now, you wrote a book called A Pickleball Gospel for everybody. Here it is. And you said the harmony of competition and cooperation in sport. I know this was part of your thesis, and you have a lot in there. You mix, your pickleball experiences along with some of your thoughts on that. And I'll be honest, I've never heard of the term competition, and it was like, this is interesting. And I saw where you went with it. But for the sake of those who haven't read your book yet, can you explain a little bit about what you're trying to get across in your book?
Yeah. So first of all, co-opetition, it's a mixture of competition and cooperation. And you're right, it's not a term that I had heard before either. In fact, I was lucky enough in one of my interviews with a pickleball player to have described my feelings about sport and how it so often feels like things are actually more cooperative than we like to acknowledge. But to say sport is cooperative doesn't really make sense, because obviously we're also competing. And when I explained this dynamic to him, he was like, oh yeah, it makes total sense. Like it's co-opetition, it's cooperative. And that was a eureka for me. Just that word, because it expresses, what I was feeling so well. It does have a place in the business literature. So it isn't a word I made up. In business, it talks a lot about, situations where you might have a direct competitor, but also like a third party supplier that supplies both of you, and like the dynamics of working together with that third party and why that's beneficial. Some athletes have used the word directly. I mean, I talk about Darryl Waltrip a little bit. He's mentioned it several times. But yeah, the word is pretty much new as applied to sport. And what it's trying to get at is that, well, my overall umbrella argument is actually that sport is a non-zero sum game. So non-zero sum just means, zero sum would be in a traditional way of thinking about, I think, sport. Sometimes we think about winning, we think about losing. The result there is a plus minus. So someone gains and the other one loses, and mutually net benefit is zero. That would be a zero sum game. But I argue that sport is not that way, and the primary mechanism is through this phenomenon that I call co-opetition, where because of that cooperative element that is involved in the competitive process, and I think like a mutual need for the other, and the fact that what I do affects them and what they do affects me. That is a huge reason why we can lose in a match, in a game, but come out the better for it, and vice versa. So co-opetition really just gets at the way that we are all moving forward in sport, despite, losing probably as much as we're winning.
Do you think, I've been thinking about this a lot, and just thinking from the perspective of when we compete and we're competing hard and it's a tough match and we both, are warriors and get through it, and we can see how each of us have benefited. But I think, and you touch about this in your book too, there are situations where it doesn't feel like that. Where if I played you, for example, I would walk off the court and go, what was the benefit from, getting a donut in this game and getting humiliated in front of all these fans versus you getting all of this glory and accolades and success and moving on to the next round, et cetera.
Right.
Is there shall we say, a balance where that changes depending on the environment or situation in the competition?
Yeah, I mean, when the stakes get higher, especially when the money's higher, I would argue that decorum does change, and sometimes our goals change. But as far as the benefit to each athlete, I wouldn't argue that it changes that much. I think the most important thing at all times as an athlete, in whatever you're doing, is that you find sort of an equal and opposite opponent or challenge. So like in training, even if for myself, like if I can't find a singles player to practice against that is of my level, then I have to handicap myself in some ways and be creative with how I'm making sure that challenge in front of me is pushing me. And that is more important than anything else. So in a tournament setting, if you're putting yourself in a position where you're not getting any points, you shouldn't really be in that draw, in my opinion. It doesn't help you necessarily. It doesn't help the other. On the other hand, if you are supposed to be there and then the score just happens to go that way, well, I think there's a lot to learn. In fact, I even argue in the book that we're never really certain who's winning and who's losing exactly. And I don't mean in like strict terms. I mean like overall, like who's getting the most out of something. Because it seems like we actually learn the most sometimes from our biggest failures, when we fail so hard that we're like smacked in the face and have to decide moving forward that we need to make a real change. That actually is pretty healthy. And a lot of players I interviewed talked about these moments where, in the end, it was like, wow, I'm so happy that happened, because it opened my eyes to things I needed to do to improve, and I even had a very similar situation with myself in the final chapter of the book. I talk about probably my lowest moment in pickleball, and I still carry that with me. I still carry that memory of how low I was, and I think about how I got to that position that day, and I make sure that doesn't happen again. So ultimately, am I happy? I mean, was that a win or a loss for me? It seems now, even though in the moment it seemed like such a loss, like seems now like that was a big part of my success. So I don't know if I answered your question. I went a couple different ways.
You did. From the perspective of coaches and the perspective of maybe athletic directors, team owners, etc., they may not see necessarily that viewpoint, because they're looking at, if I don't win, I mean, take, for example, dare I say it quietly, Florida State this year.
Yeah.
Where the fans are baying for blood and look at what we did last year. Look at how bad we are this year. We're failures, et cetera, et cetera. They're not looking and going, well, at least we're developing players for next year.
Right.
That's not the sentiment I hear in the community. So how do we maybe, as players, as coaches, et cetera, how do we try to educate people that this is part of a process where we are getting better?
Yeah, I mean, a huge reason why I went in this direction, this direction of co-opetition, is to respond to that type of thinking where it's either win or bust, which I feel like is very unhealthy. And I talk about many reasons why, in many cases, you don't have too much, total control over winning or losing, even if you're fully prepared and you're the best. If you're the best player or team in that particular game, there are so many things that could occur that change your result. So partly I wrote the book in response to that. On the other hand, and specifically to your question, like with Florida State and football, and I know that my Huskies, after making the final last year, 5-4 this year, that's a situation where continuity is really being broken as far as players, and the fact that everyone's moving around so much. It's almost as if it's so fragmented now. Players are auditioning constantly for their next spot, that it's made the result a much more. It's always been important. It's always been important, but it feels like now, if you don't have the right result, then it's just quick trigger, and then we need to change everything.
It seems to have become more financial.
Absolutely, yeah. But for each
level,
sorry.
At least at that level.
No doubt. I think definitely things get. Well, I talk about competition and cooperation as being sort of a spectrum, and so how cooperative something is can lie on one side or the other, or it could actually be highest. And when sport is at its best, I think it's highest in both. But Yeah, certainly in professional sports, which is where college sports are going, especially with football and a little bit in basketball, and with sports that have so much money. The shift to being even more and more competitive, and being more results based is occurring. But I would still argue for any athlete on any team or any coach, really, if when you're in the moment, when you're in the season, you're part of that group, and you're looking inward instead of having all these opinions from the outside. It's still the process that you have to focus on. It's one of the best things I learned as an athlete at the University of Washington when I was training to be basically a professional was the more effort, the more of your energy you put into the preparation, into the process of becoming and doing these things that push you and challenge you and make you uncomfortable. The more you do that, the less you actually focus on the result, the less you worry about what might happen or the opponent you're going to play and whether or not they're better than you or worse, or all these extraneous thoughts. The more you can put those aside, focus on the journey, the process, the more you end up winning at the end of the day. It's kind of a paradox where, you put your focus away from something and then that thing becomes more likely. So yeah, I mean, I still think anyone involved in like at that level, the actual people involved, not the fans. I mean, the fans are the rabble rousers and demanding, a certain result. But the other ones, the players, the coaches, it's still process.
Yeah. Thinking in terms of pickleball partnerships, etc. In many ways, that's really important. Developing that relationship with your partner and being consistent. And I think you have a huge advantage being able to train with your partner on a regular basis. Yet when I see pickleball tournaments at the professional level, oh, they're playing with that person now, or they've switched to that person. There doesn't seem to be that continuity in a lot of those pairings.
Yeah, talking about pickleball, because it's so new, there are so many little inefficiencies in the game where, if you can take advantage, one of them being coaching, or you just brought up having practice time and true experience with your partner. Absolutely. I think it's a huge advantage for myself and for Eric, my partner. The amount of time that we spend on court together is really unparalleled. I don't know if there's anyone, or at least not in our sphere, the players that we play, we're on the court more than any of our opponents. So it gives us an advantage. And that's also a reason why I've struggled a bit more in the mixed game, because I haven't, I don't have a access to someone that I can, practice with in the same way. So yeah, the more that you can play with somebody, the better. I mean, that sounds banal and kind of obvious, but it doesn't seem right now to be the default setting in pickleball tournaments. Like you say, like people are really bouncing around. And for myself, I'm hoping to find a mixed partner that I can do the same thing I do with Eric, and we can grow together and think long term. Maybe in the short term, maybe it's a slight step back, but over the course of a season, we're really ready to go by the end of it.
Well, I want to be thoughtful of your time, and I know that most people who watch or listen to these do so after the fact. If somebody has a question for you, wants to reach out to you, find your book, whatever, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can reach out to me directly on Instagram at Purple Jesus Pickleball. That's probably the best way. As far as the book goes, it's called A Pickleball Gospel, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Basically, most book sellers online will have it. It's actually for limited time right now. It's currently only 99 cents, the ebook, in the hopes of, my publishers dropped the price in the hopes of getting some extra reviews online. So if any reader is interested, it's pretty almost free at the moment, and hope you leave your thoughts too when you're finished.
Yeah, I'll be shorter to leave my review. I really enjoyed it, and it was so refreshing to see somebody writing from a different sport as opposed to some of the common ones. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I do hope that people reach out with their questions. Just a reminder, everybody, we try to do these interviews every couple of weeks. So be sure to subscribe or follow wherever you're watching or listening from. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and FSU coach, thanks so much for watching.